pupil. I endear, because I think something that's important that we never forget, that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was grounded as a person of faith and was unapologetic about his witness. And so I'm going to read as our centering thought, Genesis 1:27, and we'll also share on the screen in order to center this conversation. Let me see here, play from here. Here we go. Then God said, let us make mankind, make humanity in our image and our likeness, so that they may rule, they may have dominion, charge over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Let us make mankind, humanity in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule, be in charge, make good decisions for the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And if I were to ask, if we were to take inventory as to how good of a job we're doing as people of faith, as people who are made in God's image, over the care, sustenance, propagation of the environment of what God created, I'm not trying to be a downer, but I think there's some work we've got to do. And so want to ground that that's where our space is. And it raises up, and Princess we'll talk about definitions, but around, how have we missed the mark, but also are there opportunities, and there are opportunities for how we can respond to what is going on around us. So we are in a collision of climate change, collision of the tridemic that we are in, collision of unrest, collision of violence, collision of poor environmental choices that have had deep impact. When we look at the impact of asthma, air pollution around certain generations, or even to suggest that your zip code suggests your life expectancy. And I think also, even being here in Lower Merion on the main line, this is amplified certainly by the big city, Philadelphia, and to see and the ways in which this work that we're called to in responding and being good stewards not only has impact locally, but also for the geographic area around us. So you maybe wonder, well, how does King insert in this? Well, first of all, think about it. The last night of King's life on April 3rd, anybody know where he was and who he was, I'm gonna say, spending time with? Who was he speaking before? Who was the audience on April 3rd, the night before he faced his unfortunate assassination on April 4? Anyone know who King was? He was with sanitation workers. They had staged a strike because of the unjust environment, unjust and pollutive, manner by which, the fat, all of that. And so even then, the response, King lending his voice, although tired and weak, although in fact that night was shared by a really good friend of mine that he didn't even want to go to give that speech about, I've seen it, but I may not get there. He didn't want to go to that, but he was pushed there to stand solidarity around unjust and unclean, very much inhumane working conditions. And so this is not anything new. This is just not, King was already there. I'm going to lift up this quote. Let me get to the, wrong slide, one sec, here we go. It really boils down to this. As much as I use Zoom, I should be a little bit better at this. Okay, it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We aren't going to have peace on earth. And peace is just, I know, some abstract thought, but it actually can be concretized until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. And so there's the notion of, and we'll show later down, the social determinants of health. The interconnectedness, where someone lives impacts education. Education impacts ability to be a part of the workforce. Access or non-access to food, or even the type of food that is readily available. And also, I don't know if somebody saw the inquiry yesterday around the cost of eggs, the impact that that has, of being able to make good food choices, impacts. And so all of these things are interconnected. And so if I live in an area wherein it was a former, a factory was in the vicinity, or Southwest, Philadelphia called the tire hub, all of that has impact. And so until we think across and not, of a higher order, this is when we will achieve peace. The impact of COVID, just not on catching it, but also what it has done to our minds, to our social relationships, right? Even in our, how we approach each other, or even, having to, maybe even living in fear, right? Because I just can't afford for that to happen to me. And so it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. And so this work around environmental justice raises for us to think about the correlation, thinking about what have been some choices that have not been good, but how we also have opportunities, even in small, tangible ways, to right the ship. And unfortunately, the persons who are most impacted by environmental justice, environmental racism, are those proportionally of Black and Brown African descent. Even when we think about this area that, a Lower Marion Township where we are, in Bethel, we're in Ward 4, South Ardmore, which right now is the most developed, is really, in fact, I would say overdeveloped by the amount of new construction that has taken place. There is a community that has been here for over 100 years, built on a creek, literally. So imagine when we've had bad storms, a lot of rain. Okay, there are the testimonies of basements having to be pumped out. Or we talk about, Princess, they were talking about, that certainly we know that the goodness of having trees, right? What it does to our air quality, what it does to our lungs. I mean, aside from the looking, okay, but also it costs to have trees, to maintain them, to have them. And so if I'm not able to keep up with just, the normal day to day, and I love trees, I understand what the benefits are, but how do we create access? Okay, how Ardmore compared to, and I see that Paloma from Lower Marion Sustainability Managers on the line, when we think about the tree canopy that Ardmore, it compared to the other, the other parts of the township is quite on the downside where it would come. And so efforts being taken, right, to beef up the number of trees here, but there is some resistance because when we think about the care, the cultivation. So it's one thing that, yes, I get it, but it's another to actually make it work and to make it accessible. So for us to think about, how and the when. And so let's talk about definitions. Princess, I'm gonna turn it to you to walk us through some definitions around environmental justice, and also that we, the kind of the perspective prism that we look at this work is by way of the food justice, food sovereignty work that is engaged here at Bethel Church of Ardmore. Princess?
Thank you so much for that alley-oop. And while I am pulling up my presentation over here, I just want everyone to stay in that theme of connectivity, because that very real reality is exactly why we can talk about environmental justice and tangentially related environmental racism and how it's developed into sort of these communities, these centers dedicated to food justice. And so once I figure out these technological difficulties, we're gonna jump right into that. Oh, I'm a host, so I can just share, right?
Yes, you should be good.
Yes,
Awesome.
you can.
Yeah, you go.
Boom. Okay. All right. Awesome. Are we all seeing that?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So as Reverend Cavanis introduced, I am definitely a product of natural agriculture. I hail from Sankofa Community Farm. I've been involved there and sort of tied into the community in terms of collective wellness, food sovereignty, and also recognizing and appreciating that these roots need to be connected to the African diaspora, because the displacement of African peoples throughout the world created a global phenomenon. And that is why culture, that is why food and its connection to culture, it's a shared experience. And which is why having access to enough food is not just enough when we talk about food justice movement and sort of environmental justice. The food needs to be culturally appropriate. So how we develop into sort of those systems and addressing the disparities in communities of color in terms of food access comes directly out of the movement for environmental justice. And then we can't talk about environmental justice because without environmental racism, because the movement is a response to environmental racism. So let's jump into those definitions. So what is environmental?
I think your slides might have gotten hung up. Maybe are other people having trouble seeing them?
Oh, yeah, I'm not seeing them.
Yeah. It says it's loading, so I think they may have gotten hung up.
Your screen sharing.
And I can share Princess if you want to move us along.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's
Okay.
going on. It's getting real funky over here. Let me
Okay,
see,
I can share.
please. So I'll stop.
Okay.
I'll hand it to you.
Okay, go ahead. I got you.
Okay. Are you guys able to see it? Because I'm not.
No, we're not. When you had it, maybe not do it in slide view, just the other view, because we saw them when they first came up.
Mhm.
But Princess, I can share my screen and share for you and move along.
Okay, I think we're not seeing your screen either.
Okay, hold on. Let's see. Let's try now. What about that? Can we see?
Yes,
Oh,
Okay,
I'm
great.
seeing that.
now we can see them, but yeah.
Okay.
No, but this is where we're having trouble. When you switch to the slide view.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know why. I think Google's having trouble
Don't put
loading.
it in slide view. Just run it in that
got it. Okay,
setup view.
here we go.
There you
Great.
go.
Okay,
Thank
there we go.
you.
Princess.
So what is environmental racism? Okay, so it's definitely going to be communities of color that are disproportionately the recipients of environmental exploitation. And so what does that mean? What is that going to look like? I would definitely like to highlight the fact that this can present in a local context as well as a national and international. And the examples that I'm going to bring forth are not news, but I hope that it reinforces these levels of context. So locally, I was speaking with the Reverend, and she had let me know that for a little minute, Lower Merion did not have a proper sort of infrastructure in place to handle waste management until maybe the last 60 or 70 years. In addition to that, she even spoke a little bit about the inability for Lower Merion as a township to be able to deal with flooding, which I think is really huge. not just in terms of damage to people's homes, but where is that water going in terms of filtration? How is that water being used and funneled back into the environment in which people live in a productive way that isn't wasteful? Or, in general, how can we track that movement? So in terms of local environmental exploitation, when we're talking about environmental racism, we're going to see communities of color just being sort of an afterthought or lacking the infrastructure, the dedication, the attention in terms of funding or resources. So nationally, I know we're all familiar with the Flint water crisis that's going on in Michigan. I know we've all heard about the Dakota Access Pipeline in terms of environmental exploitation there. Flint is another example where we are lacking the attention and the resources and the allocated funds to handle sort of environmental injustices swiftly. And we're seeing that correlation happening in communities of color with the Dakota Access Pipeline. That is a blatant disregard for sovereign nations, and the importance and therefore the attack on sovereignty highlights its critical function in society and the way that we take care of our people. So we are seeing the national level here for environmental racism and environmental injustice attacking different facets of life that connects us as a people and a culture. And I can't believe how awesome that is. The theme that we're entering this discussion with is about connectivity and intersectionality. So mind is being blown. Moving right along, we have this sort of international discussion when we're talking about environmental racism, and that is being tied to climate change as an issue. The legacy of imperialism and colonialism have left countries that have been over and over traditionally disenfranchised by those systemic those catalysts for systemic racism. The way that scientists and sort of experts have told us that we can help improve those situations of climate change, those countries who unfortunately have been just tore through the mud with colonialism and imperialism are unable to help. So here we have another layer, another context internationally in how climate change sort of is directly connected to that injustice and to environmental racism. And it's an alarming trend, again, that these same communities that receive less funding to improve these environmental issues, we see the consequences being poor air quality, poor systems for waste management, poor water quality, et cetera. And so we can follow sort of this movement and develop it within our community to having sort of tangents and pivots and offshoots, but it's all stemming out of the fact that where environment is concerned in terms of the land that we are farming, growing food, living, and sharing, it's not being taken care of in the way that benefits people of color. And that happens on the local level, the national level, as well as the international level. I'm ready for the next one. Thank you. And so a direct response for that is the environmental justice movement. Again, theme of collective wellness and collaboration. So it's going to be a collective effort, right, to improve and maintain a clean and healthful environment. And this is an awesome and amazing step in the right direction for change. Ready for the next one. Oh, Reb, I'm ready for the next one. So, like I was sort of hinting at before, coming directly out of our efforts to address the many ways that we can improve our environment and improve the way that we are living is going to be addressing sort of our access to not only healthy and nutritious food, but culturally relevant food. So in these discussions and sort of discourses, you're going to hear terms like food insecurity and food justice. So food insecurity is going to be the state of being without reliable access to sufficient quantity of affordable and nutritious food. The food justice movement is going to take the issue of food insecurity extremely serious, but it's going to add a different level, a different notion, which I think is the most important and key importance, is the fact that that food, once you have access to it, once it is nutritious, it has to be culturally relevant. Like I mentioned before, food, partaking in meals is a cultural experience. It's something that is shared. To be without culturally appropriate food or enough of it, it's like an effect of isolation. It's going to be one of the legacies that we need to dismantle from slavery. It's forcing you to have a lived experience alone. It's preventing connection from people who came before you. It's preventing connection from the people around you who you grew up with. It's preventing the provocation of like nostalgia, things that are critical to you as a human being and your soul. So food justice is not just about making sure that you have enough access to healthy, nutritious food and options, but to make sure that that food is culturally appropriate. And so what is food sovereignty? I had mentioned sort of sovereignty and connection with the Dakota Access Pipeline, and recognizing that that Native American tribe was supposed to be, had agreed to be a sovereign nation, meaning different, I'm going to expand further on what it means to be food sovereign, but sovereignty in general, meaning the people are in control of the people. In short, when we talk about food sovereignty, we are speaking about moving towards putting the systems in place. The people are not only in charge of producing the food, growing the food, but they are in charge of the mechanisms surrounding its distribution, its packaging, its transport. In food sovereign communities, it is our hope that we are able to track the movement of our food from seed all the way to the plate. This, when you think about it, when you think how powerful it is quite radical, because it is an extreme contrast to the food system that we operate on globally today. To being able to trace your food back to its seed means that you are a part of every process that went into growing that food, and it is mind-blowing. So when we are advocating for food justice and advocating for culturally appropriate food, having access to that, we find ourselves making communities that are food sovereign. I am from Sankofa Community Farm, and that is the mission, as the Rev was saying. What happened out of us growing food and interacting with our neighbors and being a center for culture, collaboration, and connectivity, we found ourselves, and it was the mission, but we were actively doing it, creating a food sovereign system. And so it's not just Sankofa Community Farm, there are other urban farming initiatives and centers like Armor Victory Gardens who are doing like the same thing. And so next slide, please. Reverend Kavanis. Who are doing the same thing. And what makes it unique and what makes it connected to our community and our environment, and exactly the power behind running these centers, these growing spaces, these growing centers, is the fact that we do our work never forgetting that our methods of farming are rooted, traditions rooted in the African diaspora, because the movement, rather voluntarily or involuntarily, of African peoples worldwide created a global phenomenon. We have pockets of culture, pockets of recipes, of oral history that have been passed down, shared, and explored through growing food, through making food, through sharing food, through harvesting food. And so us moving the way that we do in terms of growing food and food sovereign communities not only pays homage to the fact that we are pulling from the African diaspora, it helps us move forward, not forgetting the legacy, not forgetting the hardships, and not forgetting where we've come from. That being said, Ardmore Victory Gardens, I'm so excited to be a part of leading the efforts here in this growing space. So I hope you guys are still with me and us following the development from talking about or being aware of environmental injustices happening throughout the world, locally, nationally, and how we can begin addressing those issues through offshoots of efforts to address sort of food insecurity. And so the mission at AVG is to promote community wellness, intergenerational learning, and food sovereignty by creating a space where people can come together with the purpose of sharing knowledge and growing nutritious and culturally relevant food. And Reverend Kevin was speaking a little bit about the impact on the community, but I'm super excited and happy because I first got my introduction to the Victory Gardens through their home garden bed program. We were offering support from Sankofa Community Farm, and we were actually able to get out into the community and see how transformative this kind of access was. Also, an additional impact is that the food being grown at the gardens is made available. Either it's free or extremely subsidized. And it's been supporting sort of the harvest and the produce 30 local families, in addition, like events. So it's going to be powered by community members and partners through volunteer opportunities, and over 4,000 pounds of food each year have been grown, taken care of from seeds. We can even track the seeds. I believe we get our seedlings from PHS. Reverend, please correct me if I'm wrong. PHS, as well as seedlings from Sankofa Community Farm. Any other ones? Am I missing any?
Certainly True Love Seeds with
True
Chris
Love Seeds.
and Chris and Owen. But I think just to again to show this practical way of the interconnectedness of growing food, but also the environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
Something I also want to put into play when we think about environmental justice, environmental racism, is that there is a great movement now around land acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
Of acknowledging from whence we, what was the use of this land, who owned it, right? So even in the space that I am now, I would say I acknowledge the Lenape Indians.
Mm-hmm.
I acknowledge the four parents who purchased this, this land. And even also, when we've been doing a lot of work and working around community gardens, this has proved to be important because we want to know what was going on in the land before we put a bed down or doing in-ground growing. Okay. And so to know if it was, and certainly there's certain assumptions that are made, particularly for greater Philadelphia area, especially that it's highly toxic, has certainly impacted by pollution. Okay. Not environmentally friendly dumping. Okay. And so all of that becomes a part of, especially, and then that there's some things you just can't correct, right? I mean, they're so far gone. However, there are ways in which to still grow. The other piece is I may not want to grow vegetables, but I can grow pollinate. I can grow flowers. I can grow pollinators, right? So even in the choices that we're making, and so some of the work of the Lower Merion Conservancy, I'm a happy board member, soon to be board member, and the Delmont Avenue project. So not too far away from Bethel, and that community, that community on that street coming together and creating, rain gardens and putting in rain barrels, and the purchase of certain types of flowering bases. all towards helping to redirect, and also that this has a impact with the watershed.
Mm.
And so just again, just these local ways that we can be a part of this movement in responding, but also having to acknowledge, some of the ills and what is a way forward. Now, what's striking though, is that to do this work is not easy, and it also can be expensive. that there are resources needed to do this work. And that this is patient work, that this is a marathon, right? It just doesn't automatically just happen. And so even when I think about the garden here at Bethel, we'll be in our 6th growing season, it's pretty much quote unquote on autopilot. However, there's still some aspects that we are sensitive about, right? There's new pests that will show up, or we think about the summer that we had, right? 100+ degree weather. A lot of us lost tomatoes or just weren't able to, get a yield on certain vegetables. This all has impact. And so how do we look about the interconnectedness, and how do we, use it as our commitment is around natural agriculture, and also the energy that we bring into the space, the prayers that we say, the words that we use, the company that we keep. And so again, just, that I am convinced that this work, as much as, yes, this is an international, national, but what are local, family by family, street by street, institutional ways that we can respond to this challenge. And then also that we have a clarion call as being people of faith towards this work. So something just want to add into the mix as we, and would be happy. And Princess, anything else you want to add to that?
Oh, I'm already unmuted. No, exactly that. I really thank you for hitting on the fact that we move by paying honor and homage to the land that we're working on. Definitely goes back into us appreciating ancestry and appreciating the, traditions that we're using presently.
Open up. We put a lot out there. See if there's any thoughts, any questions. I know that there was a direct, and we'll put some articles in the chat, and certainly other resources, and would love to stay in touch. And so you're welcome to, so you just want to open up if there are any questions, thoughts, ideas, any responses to what we've shared this morning.
Sandy, I think Sandy had.
Well,
your
I
hand up.
guess,
Go ahead.
I guess that to me, the overwhelming thing that comes out of this is that this is incredibly important. And how can we support it? What are the most, some of us, for example, cannot garden. Our backs do not want to garden. Our knees do not want to garden. We cannot garden, but we do want to help. So what is it that we could do in practical terms to support this?
Sure. Thank you, Sandy. So one is certainly around advocacy. So for example, here locally in Paloma, if you want to chime in, there was just completed a Lower Merion sustainability survey. So it asks a range of questions. And so it's been very, very, and to have the, now that a lot of the data has been compiled, but what will now be, like I sat in the workshop the other day and working through like what will be the priorities. And there's so many, I think it came out to like 50 something areas. But then again, how do we get the resources? How do we get the different entities of the township on board? We also know that just to get anything to happen, we know it's a process. And so how are there small ways, right? I would also say that, yes, okay, I don't want to garden or I can't, but we all might buy a plant, right? We might also, are there kind of environmentally friendly things that we can do, even looking at our water consumption, looking at using plastic or not, reusable bags, right? These are very small, the use of paper, and I know that, there's some things like I need to have a written document, but could I make some other adjustments? I think also, for efforts that are in this space. So something that we're very unapologetic about, and Princess mentioned, for example, like when we're buying seeds, and nothing against, Johnny Appleseed or, the little packets you get, but I can't point back who the grower is. I can't point back the story of that seed. And so that becomes also, I think, in the, even supporting local farmers, right? Ken Meter writes a book about local community webs. Spending $5 a week to a local farmer has tremendous impact. And we also know that buying a tomato from the farmer's market is much better than going to Acme. Nothing against Acme, but I know the story behind it. And also supporting efforts that are, pushing. Also, could be also around, when we talk about, as I raised around, the challenge of tree care in certain areas is a challenge. And much of that is because of finances. And so what would it be to have a tree fund? Or we talk with local arborists to say, you know what, okay, would you be willing to do some discounted work? Because there are some of our neighbors that just can't afford, but we, or maybe want to have trees, but we know trees mean maintenance, mean money. So those, I think, could be some ways that we could be helpful, along different strata.
I think Representative Daly, want to pose a question or a comment?
I guess it's mostly a comment. When I signed on to this, I had an idea of environmental justice, but I think that you have really brought this home to the area where we live, and I really appreciate that. And I just thought it was a terrific what you're doing with this kind of a garden. And I saw a lot in the chat about how can we help, and that's kind of my question also, like, how do we help spread the word? But I think that, like sometimes the Earth Day celebrations that happen in April are great ways to get the word out. And the different civic associations are doing a lot of that also, because, and so those are just a couple of my thoughts. But your comments about trees, I have a huge tree in my backyard, which was there and was probably there for maybe 100 years before I moved into this house. And yes, it's really expensive to take care of it, but it really also cuts down on air conditioning and other kinds of things, although it's a job having a tree like that. And so I thought your ideas about reaching out to local arborists and tree folks is a really good idea, because they're the folks who really understand it. And the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society also with their tree tenders program. So there are a lot of things around, but it does seem like you have avenues into a lot of that. So congratulations on what you're doing. In 6 years of having that kind of a garden and spreading the word is really a tremendous achievement. And I'm sure you're looking for how to spread that. So 30 families here, 30 families there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you.
I think Paloma is next in line. And Paloma, there was also a comment for you in the chat about whether you have a counterpart in Philadelphia. So if you want to.
Yes, hi. I wanted to respond to the Reverend's just question about getting involved and things. And I think for environmental justice, food sovereignty and food security is one component, but it's such a broad topic, and there's so many ways that environmental racism and environmental injustices are ongoing, and past injustices are continuing to have an effect. So I think as far as getting involved, I wouldn't focus so narrowly, if gardening's not your thing, I wouldn't focus so narrowly on that. For environmental justice overall, it's understanding, and this is as much of a question as it is an answer, it's understanding what are the environmental justice and environmental injustices that are ongoing or that have historically happened in our area that are still having an effect today, and looking at that as a whole, and what can we do about one or all or many of them. So yeah, if gardening is not your thing, I think there's a lot of other environmental justice areas that could use attention. And the tree planting and the tree care is one of many as well. So I think it's an ongoing conversation. a, you know, community conversation of understanding, okay, what, you know, hyper locally, and Lower Merion is where I'm at. So, you know, what are the issues that our community is facing around environmental justice, and then kind of tackling them.
Thank you, Paloma.
Thank you for having this. This is great.
Sure thing. Robin?
Hi, good morning, Reverend Cavanis. Good morning, everybody. Thank you and Princess for such an enlightening conversation. When I think about the environmental injustice and the food insecurity, I look at 3 areas in which I'm involved in. My church is in Philadelphia, the inner city of Philadelphia, in the West Oak Lane area. And I look at within that community where the local supermarkets are, where people can get food and they can get fresh fruits and vegetables. They do have to travel a bit to get to those markets, to get those fruits and vegetables that they need in order to have a healthy diet. And then when you think about them traveling, excuse me, you think about the seniors who may not have access or may not be able to get to those locations in a frequent basis. And then also, I'm a part of another organization, my sorority, that service the Delaware County area. And I think about communities such as Chester, Pennsylvania, the inner city. They have not had a supermarket in their community probably for as long as Chester has been there. And they just recently, within the last year or two, had a supermarket built in the city of Chester. So when you talk about the food insecurities and sovereignty, you do have to look at the various communities. Some communities are very blessed to have access to everything that they need. And then there are other communities who are barely getting the bare essentials that they need to live a healthy life. So thank you both for that information and giving us ways in which we can help the communities that we serve. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't have.
Oh, Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi, how are you? This is so wonderful what you're talking about. Now, I know Radnor, if you have a tree on close to the road, that's like dying, they'll take it down and that could save a lot of money. I would think sometimes you have to they'll say no, but you have to fight. I had to get my commissioner to help me do that. Anthony Stevenson would know a lot about that, I would think, as a Lower Merion. And the Radnor Conservancy plants trees. So I would think maybe, or if they have extra, maybe they could give some to you. I don't know, but that maybe Lower Merion has some conservancy, because I'm not totally up on that. Just a thought. Thank you. It's wonderful.
Yeah, so there is the, and I'll put in the chat, the Lower Merion Conservancy.
Yeah.
And also there's been a few, like through, as Rep. Daly mentioned, around the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's tree tender program.
Oh,
But one of the pieces has been, you know, yes, this makes sense, but what is required of maintenance and upkeep. And so and I think that speaks to in this period of where we're talking a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. So it's one thing for me to get it, but it's another for me to be able to cultivate, for me to stay the course with it, and having the access, the means, the resources to do it. And so I think that also plays a piece into this work of being in this movement of environmental justice, right? And again, you know, also want to lift up when we're talking about concretizing, making this real, you know, especially in certain neighborhoods, you know, and if we're, you know, we're able to walk there or we're able to access, you know, so just some other considerations. Princess, do you have any closing thoughts? And certainly Rabbi Ackerman would love to hear your voice.
Princess goes first.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm just super excited to be here and listen to all of your suggestions. I'm hearing things that I've never even heard about, and I consider me being a part of this work for like the better half of my life, my 23 years. And the government push to have more farm stands in sort of neighborhoods that are underserved, I think that is something we should definitely be demanding of our government officials. I think that is something that should definitely be worked into budgets and worked into funding. So I'm just extremely excited to know that we have people, we have communities and centers buzz around keeping this movement alive and keeping it progressing forward. And I hope to see some of you guys out at a volunteer opportunity, because I'll be at Ardmore Victory Gardens this growing season.
We want to thank you all for being here, and a special thanks to Reverend Cavanis and to Princess for this just extraordinary, powerful presentation. Rev, you began with words from the Torah, words from the Bible, and I want to come back to those words. The second creation story in the book of Genesis, chapter 2 of Genesis, describes the Garden